Thank you. Hello, everybody. Come and join me. So we are going to be talking today in the first of this set of panels. Actually, you're here. I'm on the wrong side. I've been told that you're there. So is there a little order? Well, sit wherever you like.
You have to. Here. Okay.
Now, we are practicing global economic diplomacy now. In front of you, you're seeing where our distinguished guests sit. This is. I did this on purpose because this is what the global multilateral system is like. No one quite knows what's going where.
But it all falls into place in the end.
No, it is. Our panel is called "Can Global Economic Diplomacy Advance Global Cooperation?" Economic Diplomacy Advance Global Cooperation. And I would submit that we don't have much global cooperation and we don't have much economic diplomacy. So I've been wondering what we're going to talk about for the next 20 minutes. But we are going to try and figure out how best to use economic tools in this more complicated, more polarized and more fragmented world. And to do that, this is an extraordinary panel. None of you need an introduction, but just in case, His Excellency Sheikh Salman bin Khalifa, Minister of Finance and National Economy of Bahrain. Thank you for joining me. Next to him, His Excellency Goyal, Minister of Commerce and Industry of India. This is not working. Okay, is that better? Welcome. Next to him, His Excellency Jean-Yves Le Drian, now the chairman of AFALULA, which is the French Agency for Alula Development, but you have been Foreign Minister, Defense Minister, Europe Minister of your country. Welcome. And next to him, Secretary Steve Mnuchin, former Treasury Secretary of the United States, and now founder and managing partner at Liberty Strategic Capital. Thank you all for joining me. I wanted to start with you, Sheikh Salman. First of all, do you agree with me that we have very little global cooperation and very little multilateral economic diplomacy?
I think it's challenged at the moment, and there are definitely challenges that we need to overcome. And it's great to be here today, if I may start with that, and great to be on the panel with you, Zani, and great to be at this wonderful event that's hosted by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And the real testament to the success of FII is that if we look at the first time it was hosted, and now it's in its 8th edition, foreign direct investment in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has increased by more than 20-fold since the first FII. So that's the real testament to not only this event, but also to the importance that the world is giving this region in terms of investment. In this environment, globally, there are challenges. One of the biggest challenges today is that the multilateral framework that emerged from the end of World War II is a series of institutions that we need to revitalize and ensure that they are fit for purpose given the challenges and opportunities in the world that are upcoming. Technology with AI will be transformative. Climate change is a big challenge. And the level of sovereign and personal debt globally is quite concerning. So is that multilateral framework representative of decision-making in the world today? And is it well suited to provide the solutions? That's an open question. And we need to revitalize those institutions to be fit for purpose.
I think one could probably go further and say, no, it's not, right? I mean, the Bretton Woods institutions, I think, are increasingly not fit for purpose, given the challenges that you lay out, and indeed their representation. Maybe with that, I'll turn to you, Minister Piyush. Do you agree? I mean, you are a senior minister in a country that is moving center stage in the world economy. You have, I think, been a great beneficiary, your country, in many ways, of some of the developments that have happened recently, particularly the tensions between the US and China. But you have huge economic potential. What do you see when you look at the organizations of global economic diplomacy? Do you see institutions that need improvement? You hosted the G20. It was a huge success for India. Are those the kinds of institutions we need instead?
Well, I think challenges are always important to keep us all going. Otherwise, all of us would be out of a job. And I don't think that the world is challenged beyond its capacity to convert those challenges into opportunities, as you mentioned. To my mind, the Bretton Woods institutions started off with 2 or 3 levels of differentiation. We had a developed world which had its supremacy. We had the Cold War between different parts of the world, which has now come back after many years. And at that point of time, many of the developing or less developed countries did not have a voice. Over the years, things have changed. Now you find even a small country, or maybe a Caribbean or a Pacific Island country, understands what's good for him, understands what impact each decision we take in multilateral organizations have on them. And therefore, I think what's happening was necessary to have a fair deal for all countries, all participants of the global economy. What's happening is countries are emerging out of the shadow, finding their own place. India, for example, doesn't look at the US-China tension as a source of benefit. We believe we can stand on our own feet on the strength of our democracy, the rule of law that we offer, on the strength of a young population. Our demographic dividend works well for us. We have an average age of 29 years, the youngest large population in the world, very talented, very spirited, very aspirational. So what we have to offer is an opportunity, and countries across the world are building stronger ties with the developing or emerging markets, with the less developed countries, because that's where the future opportunities lie.
But do you agree that the old system, what people call the rules-based economic order, the multilateral trade system, do you agree that it is fraying? And do you worry about that?
I don't think it has failed. It is going through certain stresses. For example, the World Trade Organization is grappling with issues like not having an appellate body. So we are not able to resolve disputes through the WTO framework. We have challenges on certain agendas where the developed world and the emerging markets think differently, and we've not been able to reconcile those differences. But I am one who believes that the future is bright. I'm very optimistic about these issues only making things better for all of humanity. But I'll give you an example. When WTO was not able to resolve the appellate body issue, the United States and India, who are 2 litigious countries, we've had a number of disputes between us over the years. We had 7 trade disputes going on at the WTO, amongst the largest between any 2 nations. We sat down across the table, and I think it took us about maybe a little over a year, and we resolved all 7 of them bilaterally, without having to depend on the World Trade Organization rules. So we see a great opportunity for diplomacy playing a greater role in resolving the problems of the world. And India's approach is that dialogue and diplomacy is the way forward, whether it is conflict or whether it's economics.
Thank you. I'm interested. I wish we could have audience questions here, because there's clearly an audience that agrees with you. Secretary Mnuchin, Monsieur le Drian, I'm coming to you in a second, but I just want to turn to Secretary Mnuchin, because one of the big changes that we've seen in the last few years is that we've gone from a world where there were global trade rounds pushing for trade liberalization, for cutting tariffs, to a world where we are seeing rising tariffs. And that's been particularly led by the United States. And it was particularly led by the United States under the Trump administration, where you were Treasury Secretary. I wonder whether you could tell me how you see that development, whether you see it continuing, and whether you think tariffs are therefore a tool of economic diplomacy.
Well, I do absolutely. And first of all, it's great to be back here, and Sheikh Salman and I, it's great for us to have, this is our 3rd session together. So it's fabulous to be here, and great to see all the progress that's being made in Saudi. Let me just say, I think the answer is there are reasons to have global organizations, and there are reasons to deal with issues bilaterally. So I, for one, found the G7 and the G20 important organizations to get countries together, but no longer a world that's consensus-driven, where it's the same answer for everybody in these organizations. And, I saw as Treasury Secretary the economic policies of dealing with other countries as a major part of my portfolio. And part of that was on direct investment. So every time we would sit down, whether it was direct investment into the US or direct investment into another country, or trade, or economic tools such as sanctions. Now, I think in a long period of time, global trade in lowering tariffs was the right thing to do and create global opportunities. But if you talk about the US-China example, and again, I think this is a perfect example where tariffs were used for diplomacy. For a long period of time, we had a period where the US was open to Chinese investment and to China trade, and it didn't work the other way. And under President Trump, he made it very clear from day one, our job is to rebalance this relationship. And I always said, if we could create what looks like something close, not a perfect level playing field, the opportunity for US companies to access what was a huge growing middle class in China was a terrific opportunity. Tariffs were the first time that because of the tariffs, China came to the table and negotiated on a bilateral basis. The WTO no longer served that purpose, and they were very effective. And I think for the first time, we had an agreement with China. Same thing, NAFTA, there was a time when NAFTA made sense. NAFTA was an old agreement, had to be renegotiated in the USMCA. So I think that diplomacy is important. Sometimes you have to use economic tools of tariffs and sanctions to create an economic issue. In the US, because of the dollar and the global reserve, there's no question that sanctions are a very important tool. A lot of countries didn't like our long reach, but there's no question, sanctions were a very, very important tool, whether it was Iran or whether it was North Korea, that were used very effectively.
So I'm going to come to sanctions in a minute because that is an important element of the economic arsenal. But just one more question on tariffs. And I know that we haven't had the election yet, and I don't know how close you are to the president and how much, therefore, you know about what is likely to happen. But if you take President Trump at his word, he is now talking about 10 or 20% across the board tariffs, and he's talking about tariffs replacing income tax revenues. So he's not talking about it as a tool of economic diplomacy, but as a source of revenue. Is that something that we should take seriously, and what would that mean for global economic diplomacy if the US shifted to having tariffs as a source of revenue?
Well, I think we should absolutely take it seriously, and I think the president's view of trade and tariffs goes actually back a long period of time, even prior to him being elected in 2016. He fundamentally believes that we need to rebalance trade. Now, I think we should take it seriously. I think there'll be a combination of two tools. One will be where he puts tariffs on to try to create a change in behavior. And I think in the China relationship, he said he will have additional tariffs till we can rebalance trade. And he's talked about a base level of tariff across the board, which is something that I think, we'll see, but I think it's something he fundamentally believes in. Some countries have VATs, which have a different function and encourage exports because you don't tax exports. But I think there's no question tariffs will be an important tool. Now, they can never raise enough revenue to replace income taxes. I know he's talked about that, but they will be an important economic tool to rebalance trading relationships.
Thank you. That's very helpful. That's the backdrop against which the rest of the world will be working if President Trump wins. Monsieur Le Drian, can I ask you, you have been your country's foreign minister, defense minister, Europe minister. When you look at the world now, and I know you've been working in Africa and you are President Macron's special representative to Lebanon, do you think the global north, which I'm using to mean really Europe and the United States in particular, needs to have a different attitude towards economic diplomacy and towards cooperation with the global south? And Monsieur Le Drian will be speaking in French.
Merci.
Thank you. I would like to thank you for the remarks made by our colleague from Bahrain on the sustainability of the basis of bilateralism. I have been Minister for Foreign Affairs and Defense for 10 years, and I have witnessed the lack of rule of governance put in place after the war of 1945, and the Security Council, for instance, which is supposed to resolve crisis, and all tools of international cooperation which has been set up in a way. I've witnessed a sort of end of multilateralism as it was before. Without that, the new multilateralism take shape, get into being born. There are so many challenges at global level. We need new tools on so many issues like oceans, like artificial intelligence. All this needs a collective action, and tools are getting older. So it is important to react in a period, in a time frame where I've explained the end of global, happy global era, where challenges economic was taking the high priority on military agendas or challenges. So we are witnessing a type of fragmentation of so many issues. So that's not good. We have to find, we are setting up a new fora which could be next time will replace international institutions which are not being are not able to be able to meet all this what is at stake, like for climate. And then we're having BRICS, new fora. I was even very surprised. I told my Indian colleague that at the end of the meeting of BRICS, BRICS have been requested that we come back to more better exchange. It's a double standard. We were not expecting that from BRICS. We are seeing new fora and new concepts. I am thinking of multi-alignment, which means to renounce, to be free from either camps. This in this type of crime of crisis, we need multi-alignment means scattering your efforts. So in multilateralism, we have to respect international law. This is making me more
and one element of thinking about a new mechanism for foreign exchange transactions is precisely because many of these countries are concerned about the dominance of the dollar and the dominance as a result of the United States. And I wanted to, because Secretary Mnuchin, you mentioned sanctions, and I'm going to come to you in a second, but I wanted to start with you, Sheikh Salman. If we look back, I think one of the biggest shifts in the global economic system in the last 20 years will be the proliferation of sanctions, and sanctions as a tool of economic policy by the United States primarily. How do you react to that? Because you are the finance minister of a relatively small country, but you see the impact of this. Do you think it's a sustainable use of financial tools?
Thank you, Zani. I think it is an important element, but I think one of the things that is important, and I've had discussions with Secretary Mnuchin about this in the past, is that we cannot use sanctions unless it's quite a robust system. Otherwise, it doesn't achieve its purpose. And that's one of the things that during Secretary Mnuchin's time, we really appreciate the fact that it was a much more robust approach. Otherwise, you just have other avenues for people to use. Is it something that's sustainable? Yes. As a small country, Bahrain, we are naturally inclined to always be looking outwards, because as a small country, you have to look outwards to create economic opportunity for your people. You have to look outwards to ensure that the right security architectures are in place. And in this world, as His Excellency Minister Drian mentioned, there are alternative fora that are being created, but it is extremely important to double down on your strategic relationships, to double down on your strategic partnerships. And an example of that has been that in the Kingdom of Bahrain, we recently signed the Comprehensive Security Integration Prosperity Agreement with the United States, a long-term strategic ally, and increased and enhanced the cooperation that we have in the US, with the US, because it's extremely important in this environment that we start getting closer and create stronger alliances around trade, around security, and around technology, and that's extremely critical.
Unfortunately, Secretary Drian, for good or ill, I've run out of time, so I'm not going to be able to ask you more about sanctions. But just as we end, in one word, which forum are each of you, do you think, will be the most interesting and useful going forward?
For us, the Gulf Cooperation Council.
Minister?
I personally think the world moving so quickly into sustainability as the biggest challenge. I think if the UNFCCC commitments made in Paris in 2015 are respected by all the countries, both sides, including the availability of low-cost, long-tenor funding and technology to help the emerging economies, sustainability could get resolved.
Thank you. Monsieur Le Drian, which organization? 10 seconds.
J'ai dit tout à l'heure, et je le redis ici, les COP sont demain peut-être le laboratoire de ce qui pourrait être l'organisation internationale.
Les COP. And Secretary Mnuchin, last word yours.
I'm going to use my 10 seconds to go back on sanctions and say sanctions are an important economic tool that can replace military options. And just as in the case of Bahrain, we have security agreements, very proud of, we started in Saudi, the TFTC, the Terrorist Financing Targeting Center, with all of our Gulf partners, and using sanctions is a way of eliminating terrorist activities.
Thank you. Artfully not answered my question of a concept, but thank you very much indeed. That was a great panel. Thank you.